Stop me if you've heard this one before. We open at a gathering of some sort between a few fellas, and they're having, a party or sleepover, or, it varies from version to version. But they get to talking. Hey, old man McCreary's grave is out there. He died. Do you want to go and visit his grave? And then one of the fellows says, why, golly, sure, I'll go visit his grave. And then one of them points out, well, how will we know you visited the grave? That's it. Take a knife. So the fellow goes out and takes a knife. And they don't come back. And then the fellows start to thinking, what happened to it? Oh, geez, we'd better go out and have a look. And they get to the spot, and there on the ground is the fella, and she's had a heart attack, and they determine that she was wearing a long dress or a long coat, or it varies from story to story, and she just stabbed herself in the coat, but she thought it was the corpse, so she had a heart attack and died. The end. Oh, I didn't scare you? I figured I didn't scare you, because that story is garbage. Welcome one and all to the Nicholas R. Cicada Review. Today, I'm going to be analyzing urban legends. Now, to fit the theme of any urban legend, I've got a pomegranate here with me. Lovely little jewels I can pluck out. The color of blood. Think about how morbid that is for a moment. The color of blood. Little corn kernels filled with delicious, fruity, juicy blood. I've always wondered if pomegranates are related in some obscene way to corn, because the arils look so similar to kernels, don't they? Look at that. Bizarre. At any rate, today's topic, the humble urban legend. Let me tell you, Sam, there are some who would testify to the power of a good story around a blazing campfire. When the belief is suspended and you can just get into it and think, well, yeah, that sounds feasible. And these cowards will always say it happened to a friend of a friend. Here's the thing, though. I have 3 books full of urban legends. In many of these books, in fact, in all of them, about half of the stories are repeats. I believe 2 of the books are just different editions of the same. And in addition to that, about 90% of these stories are complete garbage. Allow me to elucidate. The appeal of the urban legend, the American urban legend, stems from the fact that you can take this very unlikely happening, this incredibly 1 in a million happening, this thing that could only happen given astronomically insane circumstances, and you tell the story of modern life mixed with arcane knowledge. Maybe a supernatural element, maybe no supernatural element. And these stories are repeated ad infinitum. And it's assumed that these stories, because they're repeated ad infinitum by so many people, will never get boring because you'll never stop hearing the same one. Well, let me tell you something. They do get boring. They get boring very quick. They get boring because they're petty, and because anyone who tells one does not have a bone of originality in their body. You want to know what's a good campfire story? One to tell that'll chill everyone? Don't tell the stupid knife story. Everyone's heard it. Come up with your own stuff, you lazy, illiterate doofus. Because here's the thing. Not only are 80% of these urban legends recycled into scary stories to tell in the dark, that garbage book series, but they're the worst. They're the worst, least scary stories I can even imagine. Allow me to elucidate. Take, for instance, the story of the fellow who sticks his coat or his dress or whatever. It varies from version to version. That's one of the problems with these urban legends. There's no canon, there's no consistency. But let's say, for the sake of argument, we've got this story of this fella who sticks his coat, and he seems to forget that he's wearing a long coat. And not only that, but the fellows back at the party seem to demand that he has some proof that he visited the grave, which could just be, oh, I'll take a picture of myself, or, oh, I'll take a video of myself, or, you can follow from a safe distance, say 10 feet, and watch me, and I'll go to the grave and, be there. But they say, no, take this proof, take this knife, and come morning, or whatever, we'll go to the grave and check it out and see if you stuck the knife in it. Not the best proof, but okay. So the fella takes the knife. Right? They could just take a rock or something, but they take a knife, right? And, I'm a skeptical fellow. I don't believe in the afterlife or the supernatural. But this story thinks it's so clever, it forgets to mention the one little fact that if you're willing to go out to a graveyard in the dead of night and stick a knife in someone's grave, literally, which constitutes desecration in any sense of the word, if you're willing to go out in the dead of night and stab this knife into someone's grave, that if you feel a tug at your coat, you would instantly have a heart attack and die? Now let's say, just for the sake of argument, that you have the amount of balls required to go out and stab someone's grave. Who would do that? If there is one thing that can make the dead come back to life and snatch you up, it's that. So here's a good idea. If you do that, but you shouldn't, don't be so scared if something snags your coat a little. I mean, the story has so many, just, as I said, urban legends are meant to be a 1 in a million circumstance that makes for an entertaining, a real pulse grabber. But all these plot devices seem to add up into an just an irreconcilable mess. Would you have a heart attack if you're the type who dares to go into graves in the dead of night and stick knives in them? I don't think you have that weak a circulatory system. I don't think you'd accept if you know, if your heart was that weak, is anyone's heart that weak? And besides that, even if you can't see, you can tell whether you're stabbing into ground or cloth. You'd hear a rip, you'd hear something. You know, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that the fella doesn't notice that he stabbed his coat, or her dress, or whatever. It varies. Let's say that he completes a task, stands up, and he feels a tug on his coat. Why wouldn't he assume that wearing a long coats can get snagged on things? Let's say there's a water sprinkler next to the grave. Let's say there's a bush. Let's say there's, I don't know, there are plenty of things in a graveyard that could potentially snag a long coat, just as there are things anywhere that could snag a long coat. Say there's a flower on a neighboring grave and it has thorns and it caught his coat. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that this fella doesn't understand how coats work, especially long coats, and he's forgotten that he's wearing a long coat, and so he feels a tug at his coat. Now, having established that this fella, A, will go into graveyards in the dead of night, and B, will stick knives into the graves, is he going to have a heart attack at the thought that a zombie has popped up? No. He'll feel a little fear, and then he'll run. That's what anyone would do under those circumstances. If you're grabbed by a zombie, and you've just done something which could potentially bring a zombie up. If I was a corpse and someone stuck a knife in my grave, I'd be pissed. Let me tell you that. And if I stuck a knife in a grave, I would not have an instant heart attack just at the thought of the corpse being pissed. Of course the corpse is pissed. If he grabs at the coat, just run off. Just run. You know, he's a corpse. He's pretty slow. Is it that insane to think that a corpse would come up? No, that's the one situation in which a corpse probably would come up. But again, we don't know because nobody has ever tried it, because the story is fake and never happened. And you don't have instant heart attacks from feeling something snag at your coat, especially if you're the sort who'd go into a graveyard in the dead of night. That story is very bad. It is incompetent in nearly every conceivable way. And I don't just hate this story because of how insipid it is. I also hate it because an episode of Night Gallery ripped it off. That's The Grave. And not only that, there's not Night Gallery, what am I talking about? Twilight Zone. And there's only one other episode of Twilight Zone I know of that's ripped off of one of these urban legends, 22. And gosh forbid, they're the two worst episodes in the entire series. And I've made entire videos on them. My point being that the story seems to have a kind of anti-twist. This being that whereas a normal twist will make a story more scary, the twist given makes the story actually less scary because it takes out any supernatural element and replaces it with the unfortunate fact that the protagonist is a moron. Let's say, for the sake of argument, let's try and spice up this tired old story. Let's say that the fella is found the next morning with a literal cadaver hand clutched around his neck, coming from the ground, and he's been suffocated by this cadaver hand. Let's say that he wasn't a moron. He felt the tugging, tried to run, but he wasn't able to because the corpse pulled him down, tried to strangle him, succeeded, then got back down on the ground and went back to sleep. Isn't that a more interesting and scary story? Certainly. If a cadaver is involved and the protagonist isn't a moron, that's scary. But urban legends don't thrive from having anything scary in them. They only thrive from trying to make themselves seem as believable as possible, even though they are not believable under any circumstances, because they simply defy the laws of reason. They could never happen in our dimension. They are the weakest, and anyone who tells them is not a good storyteller. Let me tell you another one. We've got the story of the mysterious hotel. This one always happens in France. It's very racist towards the French because back in the day when this was written, back in the 1890s, you know, those Brits were very superior about it. And so they'd say, don't stay in any French motels. They're evil over there. And this insipid little myth worked itself until it became the story about the fellow who checks into the motel with her mother, and her mother gets sick. And so then the doctor comes in and says, mais oui, mademoiselle, you must take this prescription over to across town, and you will fill it up there, my wife, or whatever. Oh, here you go. And so she takes the prescription, tries to get their lickety-split, but there's some kind of conspiracy to slow her down, and the prescription takes forever to get filled, right? Then she gets back to the motel, and she says, "Where's my mother?" And the French fellow at the desk is like, "Oh, mademoiselle, we do not know who you are. Your mother was never here. And look, in the ledger, there is no record of your having been here. So I guess you must be thinking of some other motel, miss." And this just goes on. Now, usually, the pathetic explanation given in this story is not that she's crashed through the space-time barrier, which again would actually make for an interesting story. The actual explanation is just that her mother had some kind of, awful sickness, which probably would have shut the hotel down if the public had been made aware of it. If they knew that there was cholera or whatnot. If there was a case of the polio at this hotel, then they'd have the place shut down, and the hotel couldn't have that. So they decided to engage in this elaborate conspiracy to have the daughter go all the way across town, waste her time, and then when she gets back, everyone says that they were never there. Now that seems to make sense. You might think, oh, it's an intriguing little puzzle. It's an intriguing little parlor tale. I want to know what happened to the vanishing lady. Tell me, Mr. Alfred Hitchcock. Because heaven forbid Alfred Hitchcock. This is an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Doesn't that just make you sick to think of the master of suspense dabbling in this kind of shit? I can take Twilight Zone, but Alfred Hitchcock, I didn't know you'd stoop to such levels. Well, here's the answer for you. Which of these makes more sense? Say someone comes in with a bad case of cholera. Which makes more sense? To tell her daughter that she's got a bad case of cholera and will die, but that they'll just, allow them to head back to England, allow for the burial to be arranged, and that she shouldn't mention the hotel, or say that her mother stayed there, or say that she stayed there, and just be like, oh, we'll go back to Britain. Thank you very much. Thank you for telling me my mother was ill. That's a shame. That's a pity. We'll figure something out. That would be a nice casual way to let it go, and they could easily just tell the British lady, oh, your mother has cholera or whatever. She has no stakes in the matter. She's not into the Parisian hotel scene. Does that make sense? Is that a professional thing which a hotel would do? Or would they literally tell this woman that she had never been there, that she's out of her own mind, and that her mother never existed, and even go to the trouble as to forge a ledger? Would they do that? Because here's the thing. Who are you trying to fool? She knows she's been there. She knows her mother was there. It's the same hotel. It's the same people in the hotel. She goes to the newspapers and she tells about, what's gone on in this hotel. Her mother was ill. They won't let her know what happened to her mother. Suddenly the hotel is in all the headlines as the arrangers of this vast conspiracy. And then everyone finds out it's because they had cholera there. And then nobody stays there ever again. Do you think of this when you're writing your stupid cockamamie urban legends? No, of course not. Of course you don't. All you're concerned with is, oh, this could really happen. But the problem is it couldn't. It couldn't happen. Not in a million years, because these stories are garbage, and they've been told for 50 years straight, and it's time to come up with something better. Do you get me? Alright. Another urban legend now. Another little story from the musty library of old papyrus. Let's discuss, just for a moment, the tale of the fellow who goes down to Mexico or whatnot. These stories are usually racist in that they imply some foreign country is trying to pull one over on you. This fellow goes down to Mexico. A merchant comes out the door saying, sí, senor, it is a Chihuahua. And he's like, okay, I'll buy it. Then he gets home, and he realizes, oh, that's not a Chihuahua, that's a rat. Think for a moment about how scary this story isn't. Think for a moment if you yourself would mistake a Chihuahua for a rat, considering that one squeaks and has whiskers and one barks and looks like a Chihuahua. There are only two possibilities here. One, you're an idiot. Or two, the rat is so well behaved that it poses no threat to you because you literally took it for a Chihuahua. These two options are all there really is. Because the thing is, there aren't any ghosts in this story. There aren't any demons in this story. There aren't any, there's nothing to give it punch. Because the only twist is, oh my gosh, I thought this was one animal, now it's another animal. Some people have rats for pets, and that's perfectly tolerable so long as they haven't been down in the sewers. And, the other thing, they're just like dirty squirrels. The other thing being that this has never happened, of course, and is that scary? Is it scary? There's this story of the food that's mistaken for, or the food that's rat meat or whatever. That's kind of scary. It's disgusting. I went to KFC and I thought I got a chicken, but it was a rat. That's kind of disgusting. Sure. What's scary about owning a rat, though? You thought it was a Chihuahua. Are you just gonna put it in the trash now? I mean, it's an animal, It hasn't been the sewage. Is it scary? No, it's not a demon. It's just a rat. So what? Okay, more urban legends when we return. God, these frickin' urban legends. Welcome back to Urban Legend Theater. We now head to one of my least favorite urban legends is that there's this very weird, there are all kinds of them. There's all kinds of them. There's the heroin needle in the payphone, which is outdated now because there aren't any payphones. Even though payphones are a great asset, especially to someone who doesn't have a cell phone, payphone. You can pay for a call. I miss those personally, but heroin needles or whatnot. Razor blades in the apples. Oh man, I am a child and I couldn't see that there's a giant slice through the razor blades leave a mark, idiot. Oh man, I remember getting tampered candy. No, I don't. Never happened. Anywho, we've got the last story. On this little list. That being the earwig. You all know the earwig. You've got to know the earwig. You don't know what an earwig is. I've seen earwigs. They're just little beetle things. They're not as disgusting as cockroaches. Heaven help you if a cockroach went in your ear. But these urban legends will always say, oh, the earwig went in your ear, and then it ate through your eardrum. I've seen an earwig. They don't seem prone to going in people's bodily orifices. They're too big, for one. And for the other, they have giant pinchers on the end. So let's say you're asleep, or whatnot, and someone dropped an earwig in your ear, you'd feel it. If you can feel, I don't know, anything on your skin crawling around, you can feel an earwig, and you'd wake up immediately and get it out quick. But let's say that the earwig, of course, wouldn't go straight into the hole there. It wouldn't go straight in there. It would just kind of probably crawl off your head. But you've got this insipid little Night Gallery episode, and this is the only Night Gallery episode I really hate, because it gets so much praise. Everyone says, oh, this is the best Night Gallery episode. Oh, really? I think there are better that don't copy from a shitty urban legend. You got Green Fingers, you got Night on a Barge. Even House with Ghost is better. Oh, the Caterpillar. Now here's how it happens. There's a fellow, and he's in colonial Africa. This one is kind of like The Doll, which is about colonial India, except that one is good, and this one isn't. There's a fellow in colonial Africa, and he's a Brit, and he's an expatriate. And then a dirty ware peddler comes up straight out of a Dickensian novel, and he says, I've got some wares for you, sir. And he's even worse than Mr. Slog in Lindemann's Catch, and he says, let's get this. I don't know how to do an accent. He says, I've got an earwig for you, sir. And the expatriate fellow, he's a chronic sexist and misogynist, and in his the other British fellow, who's a well-mannered balding gent in his 60s, says, oh, well, get out of here. We don't want your kind here. But the expatriate is like, who's that? Because, see, the balding fellow has a wife, and this fellow, being a misogynist, he wants the wife. But the fellow is alive and isn't dead. And so he realizes that by going to the little scum peddler, he can do away with the fella and get the wife. Very cliche, right? I mean, that's the most cliche setup you've ever heard of, right? But Night Gallery fans are just all for it. They just lather their adoration onto this thing. So, he goes to the fella, and he says, I'd like an earwig inserted. And the fella's like, okay, we have a special kind of earwig that doesn't exist in reality, and we're gonna put it in his ear, and it'll drive him crazy, it'll kill him or whatever. And so then, rather than going to the fellow's house himself, the scum peddler sends some henchman there, because apparently a fellow in extreme poverty like that can afford all kinds of employees, and the employee, not knowing which is which and not even understanding basic descriptions of facial characteristics, switches it up and puts it in the fella's ear, not the husband's. So he gets the earwig, but he had ordered it for the other guy, so it's like, oh, justice, right? But the thing is, so for the next couple days, this fella is writhing about in pain, and it looks very agonistic, right? It's full of agony, right? And then on the third day, he's fine, and he recovers, and he feels great. And the doctor calls him in and says, "It's a medical miracle, but I have a. Did you know something's going on? I have a big twist. Did you know this was a female earwig, and if the females, they have the eggs, and so here's the thing. Here's just where this gets sickening for me is that I've studied ear anatomy. The ear canal is about this wide. Picture a bug going through that, okay? Picture it being comfortable. Picture it not suffocating from a lack of oxygen. Bugs do need to breathe. They don't subsist on blood alone. They can't. Let's suppose that this thing gets past the eardrum and disrupts the three little bones in there. So now it's in the middle ear, right? And so the bug has already disturbed this fellow's sense of hearing on one half of his head and balance, probably. He's now in the middle ear. He's gotten past 3 bones and the eardrum, all without dying. Now, let's say that the most convenient spot which this bug would crawl out, because at this point it would really want out, the most convenient spot would be the auditory tube right back to the throat, where this fellow would probably swallow it. But instead, it manages to crawl somehow through the bony labyrinth and then up cranial nerve 7, which isn't even a physical tunnel, but a nerve. And then, as the good doctor says, it manages, miraculously, not to make a U-turn and go out the ear it came in, but to literally bore a hole through this end of the skull and out the other ear. And before the big twist is given, a female lays eggs, which it doesn't matter, this fellow is behaving just like any normal fellow, even though if this earwig crawled through his skull and out the other ear, not only is he deaf, because both his eardrums are broken, permanently and incurably deaf, because we're talking about 1900 medical technology here. Not only is he deaf, but his brain is damaged. You can't bore a hole through the brain and not have something missing. The little beastie has eaten away parts of his brain, but he manages to respond to the doctor like a normal chap before the realization of the eggs hits him. He's just like, "Oh, man, I'm glad that I made it through that." Medical miracle? More like medical impossibility. You're deaf and mentally impaired. Congratulations. That's what happens when something goes through your brain. And yet the writers of Night Gallery don't get this. They don't get it. That you would probably die from blood loss alone if one bug crawled through your brain. You wouldn't survive that. You might, but you'd be a vegetable. I think mainly the caterpillar episode appeals to people the same way that my meat butcher story appeals to people, through the lowest common denominator. And what is that? Shock. Plain and simple. Imagine something writhing around in your face. Who cares if it's realistic? Well, here's why I care. All three of these stories, the motel, the grave, and the earwig, they all have one thing in common. They all try to make themselves sound awfully realistic. Wouldn't you say? They all try to make themselves sound like, oh, this could really happen to you in reality, so you'd better watch out, because something scary could happen like this. It's all for shock. Now, let's take a recent book I read, which is It by Stephen King. By gosh, is that one of the most fun reads I've had in years. It's so fun. Because here's the thing. Stephen King, before you start reading the book, if you know anything about the Stephen King mythos, you know, oh, this is the book about Pennywise, the scary clown, right? And then you read it, and you realize, oh, it's just what I thought it would be. It is a story about a scary killer clown. Now, the great thing about this story is that, unlike these urban legends, it is very humble and unpretentious in the way it presents. It presents, you know. There is seldom someone as brave as King to just make a story with a scary killer clown. Because here's the thing, when I'm reading a horror story, I can suspend my disbelief. That's fine. If there's a supernatural element, fine. If there's a scary killer clown who manages to hide his existence from the outside world, fine. What a good horror story does is it doesn't use supernatural elements as a plot device. It simply uses supernatural elements as a plot mover in a natural world where things work as they ought to. Supernatural elements are great. They're wonderful to introduce, a level of interest. If it didn't have a scary killer clown who's also a demon and magic, it'd be boring. Likewise, because all these urban legends try to explain themselves as realistic and probable, they lose credibility. And they seem even less credible by default. And if you really take a look at them, you'll notice just how stupid they are. Just how useless they are. Now, if King went the route of these urban legends, it would be revealed, oh, Pennywise not a demon after all. He's just a fella dressed in a clown suit who murders people. He's not a demon. Can you imagine that? How boring. Because this isn't Scooby-Doo. We're not trying to I shouldn't compare Scooby-Doo to urban legends. That's an insult to Scooby-Doo. But my point being that within the world of it, within the town of Derry, Maine, I can accept that there's a demon clown. I don't need any rational explanation for the demon clown. He is a demon clown. He has scary balloons, and he says, "Come here, Georgie," and that's fine, and I can have it. But when a story tries to come up with some wise-ass explanation as to why someone's mother disappeared in a Parisian hotel, or oh, you didn't come back from the bet last night. Oh, she died of a heart attack. Or, oh, the female lays the eggs. All I can think is, where's the ghosts? There's no ghosts here. The earwig isn't a demon. It's a normal insect. The hotel isn't a ghost hotel. It's a normal hotel. And there is no cadaver reaching at your coat. You just stabbed yourself in your coat. You idiot. That's all that goes on in my head when I hear any of these three stories. That's because they have nothing in them that makes them interesting, compelling, or worth looking into. The urban legend of 3 men and a baby, I don't even know how that can be considered an urban legend. This is a ghost by the window. I don't know. I think there have been more interesting works of horror fiction since. Is this a ghost and 3 men and a baby? Oh man, it's Ted Danson. I remember that from 1994. Oh gee, it's 3 men and a baby. These urban legend books, all 3 of the ones I got, they just repeat this one over and over again. And it's pathetic is what it is. It's pathetic. Stephen King, excellent storyteller. Excellent. It is a national treasure. Pennywise, the top clown. I enjoyed every minute of that suspense-filled novel. That suspense-filled, fun, scary novel. What's scary? It doesn't have to have a rational explanation. It can be ghosts. I'm fine with ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts. But if you're a good storyteller, like Stephen King, you can get me to believe anything. You can get me to believe demon clown in the sewer. Whatever. If you can make it seem reasonable, alright. But I don't need any garbage explanations. Oh, yeah, the instant magic heart attack. Oh, this is an instant evil magic hotel. Oh, this is a magic earwig. It doesn't destroy your brain. That's when I would just want to why? I don't know where these stories come from, and that's what's wrong with them. They're all in the public domain. They're all insipid. There's nobody who can take responsibility for them and say, yes, I created this thriving heap of trash. And so yeah, that's why I just can't stand urban legends. If you ever hear one of these at a campfire, if you ever hear one, tell the fella to stop and knock it off and come up with something of his own. Because it doesn't matter if they're in the public domain. They're trash. Stop using them. They're in the public domain for a reason. Nothing good is in the public domain. Sherlock Holmes is in the public domain, sure. Lovecraft is. Poe is. But urban legends? They're the most stupid garbage. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Why do I feel the need to tell you this? Just 'cause. Just 'cause it needs to improve. Something needs to be done about these things. 'Cause they're trash. And if I don't critique them, nobody will. No one has the guts to. Alright, that's it. I don't suspend my disbelief. I just don't swallow garbage. I have a tolerance for scary stuff. I just don't have a tolerance for stupid stuff.